Hey guys, this is it's Thursday, August 28th, 2025. I'm making another video, first one in a couple of years. Oh, so much has happened since then that I don't feel like talking about writing, which was about my first video. It's more of just personal thoughts that I really needed to get out of my system. I feel like processing it mentally wasn't enough. I feel like I wanted to be expressed out into the world in some way, so here I am, exiting my comfort zone for a little bit. I feel like making just short vlog videos just to, I guess, just help myself process things and I guess help a few people along the way. One of the things I've been dealing with a lot, especially over the past year, is recovering from what I call spiritual teaching trauma, which is, I'm not sure too many people have talked about it or experienced it, but for me, that was my main challenge. And basically, it amounts to me not knowing when to stop listening to YouTube videos, when to stop listening to authority figures on the internet or even in real life, because that did so much mental damage. It helped a little bit, but of the state I was in over the past decade at several points, listening to any sort of advice was the last thing I needed, but I kept doing it because I just didn't know. I was not in contact with my own truth, didn't have discernment for multiple reasons, but now I do, and I have enough clarity to be making this video with some sort of conviction. So my arm's getting tired. Basically, I've been meditating 90% of my free time for the past at least a year, and excavating all this mental rust, all these negative beliefs, all these misinterpretations that came from just watching way too many YouTube videos from spiritual teachers and all that conflicting advice that I'm trying to process, and especially feeling guilty for not being able to follow that advice that made no sense in the first place, which is sort of silly now, but back then it was, it would ruin my day sometimes, listening to a video or a teacher that I had gained some insight from and sort of put my trust into them, and then they say something that made no sense or just felt really disempowering, and because I was in such a automatically believing state, I would force myself to believe whatever they just said. Let me know if you feel the same, or if you felt the same at some points. When a teacher says something and there's an automatic, oh, that must be true. It must be true because they've said it, or a lot of teachers have said it. Therefore, it must be true, and I have to believe it. It would be arrogant of me to not believe it, because they said it and they have a lot of followers that also believe that. Yeah. Not a very awakened state. And with that mindset, you're out of touch with your own truth, which no one can tell you what that is, what the form that will take. So that's been like 80% of the distortions and the shadow work. I've had to deal with some form of that from various spiritual teachers. Mostly, I would say Eckhart Tolle. I listened to so many of his videos, and he helped in the very beginning. You know, I needed that at the very beginning. But then I kept repeating and listening. Found his YouTube channel, and basically it was downhill from there. Looking back now, I could definitely tell, like, when I would click on a video, even before he said anything, I would start feeling more flat and weird and not very present. And now I know that's a signal from your intuition saying this is not for you. And almost every single time, then he would say something in that video that just made no sense, would not resonate, felt it would, you know, half the time I was misinterpreting what he was saying, but I would force myself to believe what he was saying anyway. And I would just completely tank my mood, completely, you know, then I'm overthinking it. I'm like, oh, what does he mean this? Does he mean I can't do that? Or is this wrong? Or, you know, oh no, I'm not allowed to think about the future, I guess. And thinking about the future is bad. So many things that I had to face and finally convince my subconscious that they can be wrong too. I can misinterpret them, for sure. I do that a lot of times. But there are some times when they've said something and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm interpreting that correctly. And I'm pretty sure I have a different perspective where that's not true. That's not necessarily true. And honestly, when I found that ability to say that and not feel like I'm fighting him or judging him or whatever, then that's one of the most empowering feelings. The ability to disagree with someone regardless of their status, but not feel like I have to argue with them or mentally, you know, set up a fake version of them and then win the argument over and over and over and over. Which that is actually the other side of the coin of automatically believing them. Some part of me would recognize this is not serving me, whatever, and it felt like the only way to escape was to go to war. And imagine I'm in a debate or whatever, then bring up all my points, and this is why you're wrong, and this is the exact scenario where that would not apply, and it's wrong. And if people followed that advice, just then their lives would be torn down, and it would be all because of this bad advice. Oh, I'm glad I have never had any of those arguments in real life. But I had to deal with both of those energies, that automatic obeying and believing of authority figures, and then the slightly less disempowered, vengeful arguing, which would get very intense and create another level of hell. And it would so many times like feel like I'm just about to let go of something, some concept or whatever. And I'm starting to feel more free, and then that pattern comes back of, I know I'm right and they're wrong, and therefore I need to imagine how much I would win that debate. But no, there's a third option, which is to feel the resonance of whatever statement anyone says and just evaluate it neutrally. Does this feel like it makes me more alive, helps me gain clarity? Or does it feel flat? Or does it not make sense? And stop there, evaluate it there, and forget who said it, forget why they said it, forget how many books they've written, forget if they're a channeled entity, forget, are they in such a high level of consciousness that they must be infallible. They cannot possibly have any, they cannot possibly have any distortions because they're just carnate, assuming that you believe whoever's being channeled is, they might have a label of an ascended master or whatever. Be especially careful. Be especially careful because assuming infallibility of anyone, of whatever they say, assuming that it's coming from a completely undistorted viewpoint is pretty dangerous, because you're giving away your own discernment and saying, well, they said it must be true. I'm going to figure out how to force myself to, contort my inner world to fit whatever, so that then the statement that they said that makes no sense now starts making sense. And gosh, I must have done that thousands of times, way too many times. And I still, even today, a little bit just happening, but I'm making this video now because I feel like that pattern's on its way out. Like, I'm getting down. I've dug a lot of it out, but there's still a lot of, I think at the root of that is actually fear. If some big prominent figure says something, or a lot of people say something and believe it, and then if I go looking for that truth, that it doesn't make sense or doesn't feel right or sounds disempowering or sounds like if it were true then it would be just terrible, I'm afraid to not believe it, because then if I discovered that I'm wrong, that would be even worse. So I might as well just force myself to assume that it's true. And yeah, that's not a path to discovering the truth. Assuming whatever, it could be anyone. Then they could have said the most profound stuff in the world, most world-changing stuff, and helped millions of people. They can still say something that doesn't resonate with you. They can still say something that's actually objectively false. They're still capable of harboring subtle misconceptions that maybe they're not suffering at all. Maybe they're completely enlightened, but they have a misconception about some concept or anything. So I guess that's my main advice, is to be your own master and just take any statement, evaluate it for what it is, not who said it, why they said it, when they said it, and giving yourself the permission to disagree with someone who you might agree with on 1,000 other topics. That's another challenging thing, is basically that energy of, well, I agree with them on like these 10 different topics and that resonates with me, but then they say this, and that's like restricting me and all that. And when you try to let that go, there's like a part of my mind that's like, well, they must be correct. I can't believe that they would get that wrong or something. Better believe it. Otherwise, you're going to put yourself through hell until you finally get sick of it, and then you finally get to the point where I'm at, where I just get deeper and deeper parts of my subconscious. I'm able to convince now that, yeah, though, when you heard that piece of advice, that wasn't for you. That only applies to a specific situation. You know. And I remember, I can recall back to even like middle school, learning about Buddhism and feeling like it was flat. And now I realize that's because I guess I had sort of like intuition back then that Buddhism was not for me at all. And basically anything non-duality, from my perspective, is imbalanced. Almost, not that it's completely wrong, but so many teachers will start emphasizing things or say things that when I hear it, I'm like, well, that's like not, that doesn't make sense, and I'm finally starting to listen to the voice now that says that doesn't make sense and trust that's my intuition. Because for so long, it was sort of like in the very far back corners, it would sort of like an echo of that doesn't make sense, but in the foregrounds there's the, well, oh, he's a master. I can't disagree with that. He must have a much higher perspective than I have. Oh, I can't disagree with that. I'm sure I'll come to believe that eventually. Might as well force my mind and everything to twist it into what I think he said. Yeah, it's just, these videos will be mostly rambles, part of my shadow work, and I guess part of a service to humanity, because I feel like it would be helpful for a lot of people to at least not necessarily agree with everything I say, but if they can relate to it and find someone, it is nice to have that support where you have sort of a conviction, but you're not completely sure. And it's nice to find someone else on the internet that says, you know what? Yes, I knew there was something to that. I knew I'm not just crazy. That can be a stepping stone or midway point to fully coming into your own truth. When you fully come into your own truth, you're not looking for someone else to agree with you, but it can be a midway point. If you haven't fully found it yet, you can use like-minded people to help you get more and more in touch with that. So it's nice to have that external reinforcement, training wheels. I guess that's a good way to compare it to. So I've had to use a lot of training wheels over the past year, and I'm using it less. Still, I am, occasionally I look for those teachers, though it's still risky because sometimes they say something that I'm like, that doesn't make sense. So even that support, you got to be careful, because no two people will ever have the same exact perspective. Everyone wrote out everything they believed about everything, and you had an AI compare it. this person versus that person, it would find so many, at least subtle differences and probably many big differences, and they can both be true. It's just, they're both true from different perspectives, different priorities, different values, different state of consciousness. And I feel like the current state of humanity, we tend to forget that really quickly and either immediately go into attack mode, they're wrong, or like me, I had a pattern of, oh, they must be right, which is, they're both equally as destructive. So, but yeah, I think I've said what wanted to be said for today. So yeah, I'm not sure how often I'll make these, but I have a couple topics I feel like want to be spoken about a little bit. Maybe I'll share my story, but I don't know. It's just doing what I feel like doing. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye.